leads learning for a very, very large global company, like I think 50, 60,000 people. And he is just one of the smartest people I've ever met. I think, when you meet somebody and they just love their job, they're really good at their
Mm,
job. They love the job, but they're also really good. And I think this person is really good at their job, loves their job, and thinks so holistically about learning and development means.
mm,
And I think it's a great customer, but I also feel like I've learned so much from that person, like so much. And we've actually baked things into the product because of conversations that.
mm.
And I think in terms of, he's is also such a kind human that you're just like, oh, I really just enjoy working with this person. Just where I just feel like, this is somebody who has an impact every day on the job, who, works very globally, is always working, still always just like hitting the right mark, incredibly generous with time, not just with me, but everybody. And I've just
Mhm.
never had so many conversations with this person, others on the call. And I feel like this is just like, if you could replicate him and make multiple leaders,
Yeah.
I think that.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Business of Learning podcast. My name is Joao Camargo, and my guest here today is Anita Anthony, who is a co-founder of Talaera. Anita, thank you so much for being here today. I'm super excited for our conversation, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
100%. Why don't we start off in the exact same way that I start every single one of these conversations, which is just you telling a little bit more to the listener about yourself, about the company, who you guys are, who you help, and then any other context you'd like to share for the person listening in.
Awesome. Fantastic. Hi, everyone. So my name is Anita Anthony. I'm one of the co-founders of Talaera. In a nutshell, what we do is we help non-native English speaking professionals communicate more effectively across cultures, across borders, help them be more confident in the workplace and just, bring the whole self to work. Um, I am originally from Germany, moved to New York 21 years ago. It's scary to think about. It's been 21 years.
Fast. Time flies. Yeah.
And have just always, always, always been fascinated with anything that's cross-cultural education, anything that kind of, motivates us, makes us do the things we do, our lived experiences. So that's what kind of started this whole thing.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I find it so interesting because I'll actually share something about me as well. I've lived in Canada now for 13 years, but I'm not from Canada. I'm originally from Brazil.
Mhm.
Some people that might listen might already know that, but I also had to learn English. So, right, it's not my first language. So that process can be a scary process, even though it's the most spoken language in the world. I think, don't quote me on that. But it can still be a scary process getting something new, especially when you're using it for your career or when it can be used for your career, which is exactly what you guys take care of. So tell me a little bit more about that dynamic, how you guys are helping a lot of these companies
Yeah.
really upskill a lot of their employees into now learning a new language that can help their company.
Absolutely. So a lot of our learners are people like you and me. We all had English in school. However, I always say you can speak English perfectly and still not communicate effectively. We really want to help people communicate effectively. I want to give you one super quick anecdote. When I first
Please.
moved to New York, people would say, "Hey, how are you?" And I would just like start telling them how I am. I'm like I'm going, and I'm just see the look starts glazing over, and I'm like, oh, it took me a few months to understand how are you in America? It's a nice greeting. It's like, I'm good. How are you? Right?
Hmm.
Maybe a little more if you know each other, but that's kind of where it stops. And that was the first time I kind of realized there's a little bit more to language than we can see. I was doing other things at the time, but I kept coming back to it, kept coming back to it. And, what we do today is really help people make sure that they have the voice to communicate what they want to communicate, but also make sure that they really understand what's happening in a given situation. So many times, somebody says something and you think this is what they said, but it's actually something else. And by the way, this is not just non-native English speakers,
Mm.
but it's a lot harder when English is not your first language or any language, right? If I
Yeah.
had business in a different language, I do it in English. My native language is German, but it's hard. And so
Uh-huh.
we help, employees in global companies who are amazing at what they do, really good at their job, do that, make sure that they can walk into a room with authority, make sure that they really understand what's going on, make sure that they participate in the meeting. A lot of our learners, when they come to us,
Hmm.
they're like, oh, I have these great ideas, but I can't communicate as fast, or I'm so good at my native language, but then I speak English and I sound not like myself. And so that's kind of that gap of filling. We really want to make
Mm.
sure people are, really bring the whole self to work the way
Yeah.
they would in their native language.
Yeah, I think especially that part of being able to transfer the thoughts into the new
Yeah.
language. That's like once you cross that barrier, oh man,
Yeah.
amazing. But getting it to
It's
cross,
so hard. It's so
yeah,
hard.
It's
Yeah.
one of the most difficult ones, and
Yeah.
especially when you're thinking in your native language and then trying to portray that into English, you're like, ah, it's just like a combobulation. I don't even know if that's a word, a combobulation of thoughts in your head. See, right here, even though we're speaking English and I'm making up words, but we can kind of understand what it means, right?
And, you've been here 13 years. Oh, in Canada, I've been in the US for 20 years. And I still sometimes struggle, right? And I run a company that helps people, and you have to really take that moment and go, hang on,
Hmm.
what's happening? And I think one of the things that, I always think like active listening is so important. But if you're trying to actively listen and then also have the speed and the time to convey what you're trying, it's really hard. Something's got to give, right? And so we really want to make sure not to put people in those situations.
Amazing,
But it can
amazing.
be awesome.
Yeah, for sure. And tell me a little bit more about the people you guys are helping in a lot of these companies. Of course, I would assume, and this can be an incorrect assumption. So if it is, please correct me. I would assume it's not the entire organization that goes through this
No.
entire process. So who are those leaders? Who are those people that you guys are really jumping in to help?
Absolutely. So a lot of our learners are in high tech. We work with a lot of the big high tech companies, some of the small ones, everything in between. And most of the learners we're seeing are come from engineering, customer success, sales, so like customer facing roles, and just roles like engineering that are just very fast and that are very critical to the organization. And we see really the whole breadth of kind of hierarchy. We see junior employees, and it's really always amazing when we see organizations invest in the junior employees. But then we also see very senior managers. We
Mm,
see people who might have lived in the US for 20 years, like myself, or we might see people who really only ever get to speak English in a global meeting, which is
mhm,
terrifying, right? So we really kind of see everything. But I would say in terms of the roles, yeah, client facing roles and engineering, that's kind of like the kind of two areas where we see
uh-huh.
most of our users coming from.
Yeah, awesome. That makes a lot of sense. And walk me through what it looks like in terms of the patterns that you see in a lot of these scenarios where, as we spoke about, it can be difficult to get certain points across, or maybe it's the tone of the conversation,
Yeah.
maybe it's a certain way that a word might seem that it means something, but then when you say it in this way, it's a
Yeah.
different situation. Talk to me about some of the patterns that you've noticed where those barriers show up a little bit more, and that's also on the other side of that same coin where the value really comes from all the companies that you're speaking with that allows them to have a huge unlock. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So I think one thing that I see quite a bit is that sometimes people don't fully think through who they're talking to, right?
Okay.
One thing that comes up a lot, for example, is tone, right? That somebody's being too direct. Now, that might be cultural, and that's okay, right? There's not direct, the indirect, there's not right or wrong, it's just different.
Hmm.
But sometimes what can happen is that direct and indirect communication clashes. And sometimes, again, this can be culture, but then sometimes you have learners who are, not as they're not as comfortable with the language, and so where do you default? You become, the language might become a little bit more, yeah, direct because it becomes a little bit more, "Hey, I'm just trying to get
Hmm.
my point across," and they can land sometimes, problematically. And then the other thing is exactly, so who am I talking to, right? So if I talk to a colleague, I can take a little bit more of a maybe of a space. If I talk to manager, I might get nervous. If I talk to clients, I am always a big fan of over preparation,
Hmm.
especially when you're uncomfortable. So I think this is kind of some of the things we see quite a bit. We
Hmm.
offer free webinars to our community, and like direct
Okay.
indirect communication comes up all the time.
Hmm.
So that's
Hmm.
that's what we're seeing there. In terms of, like just actual language, confidence is one of the big things.
Hmm.
Many people who work in those global corporates, who work in high tech, they've had English in school. They probably studied at least some classes in English, but there's a huge difference, as you said earlier, right? Having a conversation in English around, what I had for breakfast versus having to do a presentation. And
Hmm.
a lot of times it's not that people can do it; they just haven't done it enough, and so they're not comfortable.
Hmm.
And so what we are here to do is really make sure that they can replicate these situations in a very safe setting, right, with an instructor or on the platform where they can just really, kind of, yeah, like where they're not just thrown into things, where they
Hmm.
can practice, where they can get comfortable, and then just really feel like, hey, I got this, because I think
Hmm.
that was a lot of times half the battle one, like nobody cares about your grammar. I'm sorry to say this, but nobody cares. You know, like nobody cares. But what
Yeah.
do you do care about? Are you getting a point across? Can you walk in
Uh-huh.
confident?
Uh-huh.
Are you hearing the question? Can you respond? Things like that.
Hmm. Yeah, conviction. I think it comes down to that, right? How convicted they are that they can do these things and portray that message, all that. So really awesome. Thank you for sharing that too. I wanted to shift the conversation here now into Talaera itself. in what you guys are doing, how you guys are building, how you guys are growing. And something that I always like to highlight in this podcast is that business, as great as it can sound from the outside, it's not sunshines and rainbows on the inside, right? There's lots of things going on, lots of challenges. So I'd love to hear from you, maybe some of the challenges when you are having those prospect conversations, those possible client conversations, into really showing the value that what you guys provide, and the help that it can bring. Of course, the ROI is a huge
Yeah.
thing for so many companies now when they're investing in something for their team. So, what are some of the challenges that you have when you're having those conversations?
I think you just totally hit the nail on the head. I would say 2, 3 years ago, everybody understood English training, and I think it was a little bit more in the category of like a nice to have, but the money was flowing. I think now everything is about ROI. You really have to show that what you're doing today has an impact tomorrow. So that's definitely the biggest shift we've seen over the last
Mm,
12 months. I would say more so even the last 6 months, 12 months. And it's interesting because it's something we started thinking about about a year and a half ago. How can we really show the value of what we're doing?
mhm,
So
mhm,
when that started happening, I felt like we're actually there.
mhm.
So we do things, for example, now where we want to know, like we start. And did you have a question? Sorry, I feel like I
No, go
just
ahead.
okay. Okay. Sorry.
That's a kind of a lie. I have many questions, but they're coming up.
I was like,
But you
I
go
like
ahead.
where things like now, for example, if we do a training, we really try to get hard data from organizations. So, for example,
Um,
we just worked with a customer success team. We get hard data from them beforehand, like what are your escalations, what's the call time, like really what metrics, and then do the training and then report back on those
mm,
metrics, like how have they changed. Like that's something we're doing with a lot of projects now because I think
mhm,
it's so important. And so, I think that's one of the challenges, really making sure that people understand, like we understand that you're not
mm,
here to
mhm,
have fun. Like you are here because this have to has an impact on your organization. And I know
mhm,
it can have that on your organization. And then the other thing sometimes is, and I'm sure you've experienced this, when you live in a setting where most people speak a language, they sometimes don't understand why it matters, or like they
mm,
might not fully understand that somebody coming from Brazil or Germany or China, wherever,
yeah.
might actually struggle with this. And so it's sometimes unlocking that, or even differently, sometimes you have organizations that really want to invest in employees, but they're also really worried about in offending employees, to
Mm,
say, we don't want them to feel like they need English training. So there's kind of a few different things that we kind of
yeah.
see sometimes in conversation. So yeah, the ROI,
Mhm,
making sure it's positioned as something that's of help and not like something that's like
mhm,
you're not good
mm.
enough. And then also, of course, yeah.
No, that's interesting. And actually, I wasn't expecting to hear that last point that you said, which is the comfortability aspect of it,
Yeah.
showing the employees like, hey, this is something that we're doing for your, not even your career success, but also your life in general, right? That's something that's going to help you regardless. But yeah, that's interesting that depending on how you approach it, and I guess that would go back to framing and positioning, it can be more of a, um, confronting situation as opposed to a supporting situation. So it really goes back to say, hey, here's how we can support them through this journey, as opposed to just you need to learn English right now, right?
Percent, no, that's like it's really it comes so down to the framing. And
Uh-huh.
I always argue, this is no service, no training, it costs money. And so
Hmm.
I always feel
Hmm.
like, you really are investing in
Yeah.
somebody, and that's you have to make that so clear that
Hmm.
you're giving this to the employee because they're amazing and you want them to grow here and you're seeing them. And I think this is important. And I think
Yeah.
that's sometimes where I don't blame people. I think that can be like, how do you start a conversation like that?
Yeah, for sure. And at the end of the day, people grow businesses, right? Not the business. Like it's the people in the business that are going to grow the business in any case. So that's
Exactly.
interesting. And do you think that ties into this challenges that we were talking about? Do you think they tie into like more of an awareness thing of needing to understand that you guys exist, that you guys are out there,
Yeah.
or more so in a way of standing out from all the noise that exists with all the apps that we all know and technology that is
Yeah.
there nowadays? What do you think? What do you think that challenge stems from?
Yeah. I think it's both probably to some degree. We are smaller, like you have some big names out there. And I think people always default probably to the bigger names that they might feel comfortable with. And that being said, we have quite a bit of business from the bigger names that
Yes.
migrated over to us. And then what was the second thing you said? Uh,
Yeah, I'm just wondering if that's actually attached to it. So
Oh, and
the
and also, like,
awareness
all
side
the
or
new
also
apps and yeah.
yeah. Yes.
We actually talk about this all the time, and I think this ties actually to the first point, right? I think it's so much about building trust with clients these days.
Mm,
Yeah, you're right. There's so many apps online,
mhm,
and there's so many different ways of learning. I would argue, if you're an organization, you don't have time, you don't really want to waste your time. And you want to also make sure that like people get something that's of value that's really gonna, have an impact. So the way we think about it and how we differentiate is, we are a B2B company at our core. We always have been. So I think most language companies think about the language. We think as 50% of the time about the buyer. So
Mm,
the L&D
mhm,
person,
mhm.
the manager, the head of customer success, the head of engineering, what do they need for this program to work, right? And so what is that? That's analytics, that's like,
Mm,
insights, that's like, ROI, it's
mhm.
very different. And so I think that's where I feel pretty comfortable for where we sit.
Yeah.
But that sometimes, it's hard to break through the noise because how much people have 10-second attention span, right? Between like all the Instagram, everything that's happening in our lives. And so we can't sit there and give a half hour demo online. It has to be something
Yeah.
people can capture very, very quickly.
Hmm. I
Yeah.
like that. I like that a lot because everything that you just said is nothing from your perspective. It's from the customer's perspective. It's how can you actually get into
Yeah.
their mind to what they need, what they're
Yeah.
looking for, their desires, their pains, and how
100%.
you apply yourself to jump in. And you would be surprised to hear. Usually, I don't say this a lot in all the podcasts, but you'd be surprised to hear from now over 270 conversations, counting the research that we did before the podcast, and now 170. I think you're the 173rd episode, so could be wrong, but in any case, you'd be surprised to hear how many companies just always talk about themselves. Great
Really?
features, great things, amazing things. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I think there is a huge disconnect that happens if they're not able to frame it in a way that shows the true outcomes that their clients actually want.
100%.
Right? Because then you're just like, me, and they're like, I don't care about you, I care about me. Right? Or else they wouldn't do business with you in any case. But it's refreshing to hear from you right now that you're actually taking the other stance. It's like, hey, how can I make sure I am looking at us through their lens?
I think that, talking about DNA, I think that's how we started. Like we initially, we had the initial idea about like, oh, starting a learning platform where you can connect with learners from around the world. And we
Mhm.
went online, there were like a billion of them, right? But something was like, okay, what's not working? So we had a lot of conversations. And I think one thing that always drove me from day one was I think of the learners and the decision makers as the people when it's 8 o'clock at night and they've had it with a day and they had a bad day and they just want to watch Netflix and sit on the couch. That's always a
Mm,
thing about who's that person versus
mm,
this is the idea of a VP of engineering and this is an HR
mm,
person. That's like, and I think this is why we always come back to like
mm.
what drives people and like what's their core to then, think about the product from that angle.
Amazing. No, that's really, really insightful. Thank you for sharing that too. And actually, I would love to ask a question, Anita, that I've asked almost everyone on the
Oh,
podcast here. So I think it would be great, very fitting to ask you that question as well. Let's say you had a magic wand and you can wave that wand to solve any obstacle, challenge, hurdle, whatever you like to call it in the business, that would then allow you to hit all your client acquisition goals, all your revenue goals, all your growth goals. I think so many times in business as leaders, we are focused on a million different priorities and trying to solve all of them. But for this specific question, you only get to solve one. You wave that wand, you solve one challenge, all your growth goals, revenue, clients, whatever it might be, get achieved. What's the one thing you would like to solve?
oh my God, this is such a great question. I feel like now, I feel like I'm just the last conversation I had a couple hours ago pops into my mind.
Okay.
Like, I think what I would love if I had a magic wand right now, me here, not thinking about the whole team and the product and everything, would be I'd love to know what marketing will look like in the
Mhm.
next 24 months. I,
Mm,
like we're in such a, to me, I described this to a colleague the other day as I feel like we're going from paper ads, newspaper ads to the internet. And I feel like we're again at this incredible shift in how we reach customers.
okay.
I'm very convicted about the product, but I think if I had much more mind, I would love to know what top of funnel looks like in the
Mm,
next, 24 months.
interesting. And is that more so in how to implement a lot of the new tech that's coming through, all the
Yeah, yeah,
sequences, et cetera,
yeah,
all those things into
yeah.
what you guys have?
No, it's just like thinking about like, how do people think about products. How so in terms of
Mm,
product, I feel like the product doesn't worry me at all. Like I feel like with product, we're very much ahead, and I think we have a very clear vision of where we're
yeah,
going.
but more so transferring that over to people through the
To
marketing.
people, yeah, yeah,
Mm,
making people, yeah, exactly. Like
mhm,
on the marketing aspect, like how do you exactly like scale it up? How do you make sure that people find us and not the competitors? Because I think so much is shifting right now. Like one quick example is like Google right now, right?
sure.
Now we have the AI overviews. You're no longer going on the website. We're very lucky because our AI overview is pretty strong. But like, what is that going to look like? I think this is, and again, this is the last conversation I just had.
Mhm.
So this is why it's top of mind. So it might not be the deepest, but it's something that I've been thinking about like a
No, that's
lot
awesome.
recently. Yeah.
No, yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I have one final question for you here, Anita, which is actually not a question from me.
Oh,
It's a question from our last guest to you, and they had no idea who you were. So here's the question. You ready for it? They made sure to add a very precise detail in the end. So here it is. Who is the most meaningful customer you've ever had? And their precision was describe them. So what they were like, their engagement, all those things about that customer.
oh my God. This is what a great question. Oh, this is a good one because this can go so many ways. Like obviously the first customer is always very meaningful. I will describe a customer. I think
Okay.
this is like this is a really tough one. I think I'll probably go back after this podcast and go, oh, I could have thought of something else. But
Yeah, I know. Something always pops up later. Yeah.
yeah, but I have this customer that I've worked with for 2 years who
Okay.
I just have so much respect for. He leads learning for a very, very large global company, like I think 50, 60,000 people. And he is just one of the smartest people I've ever met. I think, when you meet somebody and they just love their job, they're really good at their
Mm,
job. They love the job, but they're also really good. And I think this person is really good at their job, loves their job, and thinks so holistically about learning and development means.
mm,
And I think it's a great customer, but I also feel like I've learned so much from that person, like so much. And we've actually baked things into the product because of conversations that
mm,
and I think in terms of, he's is also such a kind human that you're just like, "Oh, I really just enjoy working with this person." I feel like
yeah.
there was a specific detail I was supposed to answer that I don't remember now. Was there something that
No, it's just describing them, and you're doing that very well.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I just feel like, this is somebody who has an impact every day on the job, who, works very globally, is always working, still always just like hitting the right mark, incredibly generous with time, not just with me, but everybody. And I've just
Mhm.
never had so many conversations with this person, others on the call. And I feel like this is just like, if you could replicate him and make multiple leaders,
Yeah.
I think that, yeah,
No, that's awesome. Then thank you for sharing that. One, I can feel their passion through you, but I can also feel the passion that you have from the relationship that you've
yeah,
had with them and how you move that on to the other clients that you work with as well. Really transferring that knowledge, take the information, absorb the information,
yeah.
and then act on it, execute. So this has been so awesome, Anita. Thank you so much for your time. I really
Yeah.
appreciate you. Where should people go if they want to learn a little bit more about you, and of course also a little bit more about Talera?
So if you're only going to click one website, please let it be www.talaera, TALAERA.com. And if you still have time after that, come on my LinkedIn profile, Anita Anthony with a J and THONJ. I'm the only one on there. And connect. Always so curious to hear, what people are up to. And yeah, love to hear from you. Thank
Amazing.
you
I
so much.
will leave as many links down below here and
Please do.
including the website. Click the website if that's the only one you're going to click.
Yes.
And if you enjoyed listening to this conversation, you want to hear more conversations like this, please also hit the subscribe button and I will see you on the next episode. Anita, thank you again for your time.
So nice to see you. Thank you so much for having me.